Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome into the Kumo Theater. If you're within the sound of my voice, we welcome you to come in and join us. And please give a welcome on the stage here from App Dynamics, Justin Vaughan-Brown.
Hi, welcome everybody. Good afternoon. Just as the introduction said, I'm Justin Vaughan-Brown from App Dynamics. And the next 15 minutes or so, I'll be talking to you about something I guess many people are wanting to do right now, which is move to AWS. But not just move to AWS, but do it faster and do it right. Ensure the complete confidence and assuredness that they can sleep soundly at night and that everything's going to work really well. So just to kick off with, the world that we're inheriting here is one that's just becoming phenomenally complex. And that complexity is increasing literally week on week, month on month. It's one where it's no longer consisting of monolithic applications. We've got multiple dependencies. We've got a more distributed environment that we need to manage and control and have visibility of. We've got more dependencies. We've got literally hundreds or thousands of ways in which an application cannot perform, that it can go wrong, and ultimately impact the customer experience. And just to set some context to that, of course, we're actually pushing through multiple releases much faster than we've ever done before. And that complexity is increasing almost exponentially. Now, on top of that, obviously, we're looking at cloud, and not only just whether you're running some kind of private cloud instance or a public cloud instance, whether you're embracing hybrid, and more recently, whether you're looking at some form of multi-cloud strategy where you're matching different vendors to different needs. And set against that, we're finding the real challenge here is that a lot of people are focused on the move phase. And I like to just use the analogy of moving house. At the moment, a lot of the focus is really being around literally, all your goods and possessions being moved into the van and the drive to your new home. Well, that really isn't the whole story, is it? That's not going to make you successful. That's not going to be a successful move, or in this case, a migration to the cloud. What you really need to be looking at, first and foremost, are the wider before and after scenarios. So from a planning point of view, just as moving house, you need to know what you're going to move, what you're going to sell, what you're not going to take with you, whether you should even be moving at all. Are you ready to move? And equally, post-move, how do you actually have these proof points and validate that it was the right thing to do? How do you understand that you're ultimately in a more beneficial situation post in the cloud running with AWS? And what we're finding is there are multiple stakeholders here. Obviously, you have operations are more concerned around the overall architecture of the application as it evolves and changes once you're moving to the cloud. You've got the dev teams who are looking at your multiple code dependencies and want to ensure that whatever they built before that was performing well on-premise performs equally well once you moved to AWS. And then ultimately, there's the business. They're investing and saying, yeah, we're buying into your cloud strategy, but what's the ultimate benefit in terms of revenue and the impact? Are you just doing this because everyone else is doing it? Or are you doing it because it's the right thing to do and we can prove an ROI against that? And there's some recent research that showed that the actual entire process of a migration project can take almost half a year. That's a long time. And what you need to do is look at how you can reduce that, because if you know you want to move and you're ready to move and you've done all the due diligence, you want to move faster. You want to get there quicker, and you want to be realizing those benefits. So first and foremost, you need to understand what you're dealing with, what your current on-premise environment involves, understand the true nature of those applications. And that's pretty tough, because from a starting point, traditionally, as you've been monitoring and looking at how your applications perform, there's been a siloed view. You have folks focused on server monitoring, database monitoring, the application, network monitoring. And each of those comes with those own established views, because historically they've known how that component or part of what's impacting the customer experience functions. And they're pretty confident when they believe that it's not them. It's what we call mean time to innocence. And lastly, you've then also got multiple monitoring tools. You've got, as Gartner say, maybe 10, 12 or more. We've even come across some customers who have an excess of 20 different monitoring tools. So how do you get to that single version of the truth, that single pane of glass? It's very difficult. And ultimately, let's just park the multiple monitoring tools and the different siloed views. It's all about the customer. Who really cares if the network's uptime's great, if the database is performing according to the database team? It's the user experience. It's when someone logs in, what do they see? What are those response times? What is the latency there? And as they go on their whole journey, those multiple touch points across the server, the network, and ultimately the backend, say the database, how are each of those performing? And then once you've moved to the cloud, you shouldn't really be lifting and shifting, as you know. You need to look at refactoring, re-architecting those applications. You'll be embracing Dockerization or containerization, rather. You'll be looking at microservices. But equally, for example, if you're embracing microservices, in obtaining agility and flexibility with microservices, there's a whole heap of complexity that you've just added. So when there's an issue and you drill down into that very kind of nth level of the microservice, can you actually understand which one is causing the issue, which one's causing the latency, which one's giving you challenges in terms of response times? And just to quote DevOps consultants who are actually here at reInvent Contino, this quote is absolutely spot on. You simply can't just move a monolithic app and expect everything to work as it did on-premise when you move to the cloud. It's just the wrong thing to do. And then secondly, in terms of validating, proving that the move was a good thing, you've got multiple audiences. Dev are obviously looking at HTTP errors and looking at ultimately crashes, which is becoming, I think, less and less now. It's more a question of latency and response times. You've got operations who are looking at page load times, looking at always responsiveness of a web page or a mobile app, and then the business, who are focused on that user experience and customer acquisition and retention. So typically here, for example, pre-move, everything's green. We believe we've got a stable running application. But, now we've moved. The dev team seem happy with the scenario here. But what's happening from the page load time point of view? What's slowing down here? What is impacting the customers as they go through that purchase cycle? And ultimately, it's the business that are concerned, because they'll suddenly look at a downturn in revenue and wondering why this is happening. Hang on, we've moved to the cloud. Shouldn't we be experiencing revenue upturn? Shouldn't we be doing better? And they won't be interested in drilling down into the exact reason for this. They just want to know the bottom line. So where do App Dynamics come into this? Well, I'm going to focus on those two areas, the pre-move side, essentially kind of getting match fit and ready to move and understanding what you have in terms of the nature of applications. So first and foremost, this is what we call a flow map. And this is using agents across your application. We can show the entire application topology. We can show the reality of what your application actually involves. And so many times, our customers are completely surprised as to that true nature, because the applications quite often are built upon other components over time. Different teams have left that organization. And then to actually then shine a light on that environment gives them the best kind of starting point from which to say, this is what we're working with. These are all the multiple dependencies, the third-party calls. Secondly, we also look at the resource utilization. As you're moving to the cloud, classically, folks can say that you move to the cloud for cost savings, but you stay for agility. So from a resource utilization point of view, what's your current consumption? Are you over-provisioning? Are you going to repeat those sins of over-provisioning once you move to AWS, for example? So really to understand exactly what your needs will be, and then, for example, when talking to AWS, that you can right-size your environment. And then lastly, in a way this is probably the most important, is what we call the business transaction. Literally, you've got different scenarios here, from people purchasing on the web or via a store itself, or a call center managing a customer service engagement. What is the status of each of those engagements at each stage? Are they red, yellow, or green? Do you have issues? And ultimately, if you're seeing a slowdown in your application response times, you're going to be hit with issues that are ultimately going to impact your revenue. So focus on this concept of what we call the business transactions. And then once you've moved to the cloud, everything is great. No, we're done. We're finished. Job over. Well, not really, because you actually want to make sure that even moving to AWS is the right thing to do, and you've got then the business case to then prove and validate it's worked, and also then ensure that the business is bought in to migrate further applications, because I assume everyone here believes that migrating to AWS is the right thing to do. So first of all, look at having kind of what we call that single pane of glass or one view of your application performance, where you're compiling information from a database, a server, or network perspective. We work very, very closely with AWS. We're part of the marketplace. We have an integration with CloudWatch that enables us to give insights across EC2, DynamoDB, and S3, for example. And lastly, we can also help with auto-scaling to ensure that your applications always remain performant and you've got that elasticity that AWS offers. The second, this is just an example, for example, of just multiple kind of component environment here, combining both Amazon and on-premise, and just combining those so you're getting that unified view. Because in many cases, we find customers aren't necessarily running everything in AWS, or that's happening over a time. They're transitioning. So it's a very kind of complex environment that they're dealing with. Next, you need to be able to focus on what the end user experience is and drill down literally into every single page that is being viewed by the customer, or on a mobile app, for example, right down to the operating system, right down to the very handset they're using. Are they using iOS? Are they using iPhone? Are they using Samsung? Which version of Samsung? Because these can all have different implications. If, for example, that application is built to function with a Samsung S8 or an iPhone 7, what happens if you're trying to view that application on an iPhone 4 or 4S? Was that really built for that? Does that cause issues? How many of your customers are actually using those devices? And that also helps give you kind of a continuous feedback loop from a development perspective to understand which environments and applications, or in which operating systems and devices your customers are using. And also drilling down into where is the consumption taking place regionally? What are the response times? Are they different for customers in Brazil versus the United States versus the UK, for example? Do you need to look at provisioning additional environments or increasing capacity? And lastly, this is probably the most important one of all, is to be able, in a way, when you're wanting to validate and prove that migrating to the cloud was the right thing to do, is to be able to have these kind of benchmarks between your pre-cloud migration stage and your post-cloud migration stage, rather than just relying on a gut instinct or siloed perspectives on this. So, for example, in this scenario, you can see how the response times have reduced markedly once you've moved to the cloud. And as you move through that funnel from, for example, the initial kind of login, this is using this as a trading example, you can see those dropout rates markedly reduced to the right once you're operating in the cloud, because the latency has been reduced, the response times are far more improved. And on the basis of that, you're finding that the abandon rate has dropped, that customers are progressing to ultimately to be able to complete a trade. For example, as I said, this is a trading example. And using that, then to be able to say to the business, these are the hard dollars that we are saving. This is ultimately the impact. And you can present that business perspective, that business lens. This is just an example of what we can do, but from a dashboarding point of view, using what we call business IQ, we can show which customer segments are engaging with the application, which ones are dropping out, what response times they are encountering, regionally, where are they coming from, and be able to have that holistic view that then drives a much, much more business-focused discussion and moves it away from some kind of anecdotal evidence to say that, yes, moving to AWS is the right thing to do. And this is where this comes back to the 30% figure that I quoted at the beginning of the presentation. This is on average what we're seeing. This is a conservative estimate in terms of reducing those migration timelines. And chiefly, we reduce those timelines in the area of user acceptance testing, that validation that moving to the cloud was the right thing to do. So, for example, you start with that kind of canary release or that pilot migration. How do you take that and then have the confidence to say to the business, yeah, let's go all in. We're ready to go, push the button. We're going to actually migrate the entire application environment over to AWS. And the only way you can do that is having this kind of data to prove to the business that it's not only working, but fingers crossed, it's actually more performant, it's working better once you're actually into AWS. Just about going to finish on time here, keep to the 15 minutes. Any questions, please do come to our booth. We are literally where you can see the big Cisco sign back there. We're just only about 12, 15 feet away. Please come over, drill in, have a look at it, take a demo. View all our capabilities there with the team. We're here for the rest of the day. Please take the time. We love to take any questions from you and tell you a little bit more about what we do. Thank you very much.